Within the ruins of the First Chechen War existed an ominous group of mercenaries fighting side by side with the Chechen militants. Who were they, and why were they fighting in Chechnya on behalf of the Chechen people? The infamous mercenary group in question was called the Ukrainian People's Self-Defense, also known by its political side, the Ukrainian National Assembly. The UNA-UNSO was a Ukrainian ultranationalist extremist group consisting of a political and paramilitary wing created by Ukrainian Soviet-Afghan war veterans in 1990. They would continue to recruit other returning Ukrainian former Soviet military soldiers, some only joining the UNSO as they were denied service in the Ukrainian armed forces. Before they fought Russia and Chechnya, they participated in various conflicts against Russia, such as the war in Abkhazia, the Transnistria War, and a number of other conflicts. In 1992, 2 years before the war in Chechnya, the UNA-UNSO members received funding and training from a Georgian paramilitary organization known as the Hedroni to fight in Abkhazia against Russia's attempt to break off the Abkhazian territory from Greater Georgia. During that conflict, they received vital training in sabotage, various weapons training, and sharpshooter training. Before initially contacting Chechen leaders directly in 1993, the UNSO already had ties with Chechen militants back home in Ukraine. The Kiev Chechen community actively funded and supported the UNA-UNSO in their endeavors before the First Chechen War. In 1994, several UNSO officials met with Chechen leaders Zelimkhan Nyaderbiev and Aslan Maskhadov to solidify their cooperation. When the war kicked off in Chechnya with the Russian invasion on December 11, 1994, a group consisting of around 200 to 300 UNSO fighters started their campaign against the invading forces. Initially, UNSO fighters would be paid a wage and be in contract to fight in Chechnya for 6-month rotations. However, not all UNSO fighters were in Chechnya simply for monetary gain. Some UNSO mercs were driven only by their thirst for war and hatred of Russia. Instead of currency, they were supplied with ammunition and food, like how many local Chechen volunteers were compensated. This supply was not always guaranteed, as Chechen logistics were in constant chaos. It is noted that the majority of UNSO mercs were there for the salary, though. UNSO fighters fought along with many other mercenaries in Chechnya with similar goals in mind. Mercs from Albania, Afghanistan, Turkey, and Georgia. Criminals hiding from prosecution and even former Russian soldiers that converted to Islam fought against Russian forces as well. It is believed that the UNSO at the time was supported by the Ukrainian government directly. Accounts from a former UNSO mercenary implied they received communication and varying levels of support from the Ukrainian capital of Kiev while fighting in Chechnya. During their residence in Chechnya, they gained an exceedingly unfavorable reputation. Reports of brutality within the ranks of UNSO mercs against Russian soldiers are echoed by Russian writings on the matter. Accounts of torture, senseless brutality, and cruelty are claimed by a handful of Russian sources. Other accounts explained how the UNSO fighters, with their similar physical appearance and training background to Russian soldiers, would trick Russian soldiers by dressing up in their uniforms and infiltrating their positions, leading many to their deaths. A similar example would be a UNSO merc by the name of Oleg Chelnov, pictured here in Grozny. He was a Soviet-Afghan war veteran, and due to his previous experience, he was familiar with Soviet radio broadcasts and frequencies, leading to him posing as a Russian soldier over the radio and deceivingly calling in artillery to strike their own men. Chelnov would later be killed in Chechnya in 1996. The UNSO was ultimately perceived as a small but significant and brutal fighting force in Chechnya that proved to cause many problems for the Russian campaign. After Russia's withdrawal in 1996 from Chechnya, which marked the end of the First War, some UNSO fighters would stay in Chechnya, while others returned to Ukraine. A fair few UNSO mercs traded and sold weapons for extra funds after the First War concluded. When the Second Chechen War started in 1999, a detachment of about 300 UNSO fighters were stationed in Grozny. A number of the Ukrainian mercenaries were new faces in Chechnya and were not present for the First War. Gennady Troshev, a Russian general present during the fighting in Chechnya, would later recount his experience fighting against the mercs. He would state the unrelenting drive the UNSO mercs had during the fighting, how they would, quote, fight until the last bullet, and how, as a rule, they would not surrender. Although much smaller in size as time went on, UNSO mercs would continue to fight Russian soldiers through insurgency and guerrilla warfare throughout the long and drawn-out Second Chechen War that would last 10 years, eventually ending in 2009. The UNA-UNSO was also involved in the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, albeit in very limited capacity. After the Chechen Wars, the UNSO would continue on mainly as a political organization in Ukraine. Numerous UNSO mercs were convicted of murder, drug possession, and robbery while not actively fighting as a mercenary, such as Alexander Luzishko, who was convicted of kidnapping and assault in 1999. He would later be killed in 2014 during an apparent police chase in Ukraine. Many previous UNA-UNSO members would take up governmental positions in Ukraine to avoid Russian prosecution after Chechnya was annexed back into the Federation. UNA-UNSO members still living in Chechnya would be prosecuted by Russia for their actions during the Chechen Wars. Pictured here are two former UNA-UNSO members, Nikolai Karpyuk and Stanislav Klik, that were detained in 2014. The Russian government would claim Karpyuk, along with Klik, and several other UNA-UNSO members related to them personally, were responsible for the deaths of at least 30 Russian soldiers and the wounding of 13 others during the First Chechen War. UNSO fighters would continue their battle against Russia during the war in Donbass starting in 2014, which would eventually lead to the full-on Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. After the Russian invasion, the UNSO gained more traction, and many former UNA-UNSO mercs came back to fight Russia one more time. In a recent example, a UNA-UNSO veteran named Stanislav Kaplanovsky, fighting with the Ukrainian Azov Brigade, was killed in the Battle of Bakhmut in 2023 by Wagner mercenaries. To end, a quote from a Russian news story on the UNSO published in 2008. There are a certain number of people in Ukraine who are ready to fight anywhere in the world as long as this war is with Russia.